After years of being invisible to my mother, I grew tired. An accident led to the secret of my birth that destroyed the whole family. I don't remember the first time I realized I was invisible. Maybe it was when I was 6 and my mother forgot to pack me a lunch, but made sure my little sister had a full meal with extra snacks. Or maybe it was when I was 10 and got my first A+ in a competition, only to have my certificate crumpled and tossed onto the counter while my sister's mediocre drawing was framed and hung in the living room. I guess it didn't matter when it started. What mattered was that it never stopped. I was the middle child. My older brother, Daniel, was always busy, wrapped up in his studies, his friends, his life. He wasn't cruel, just indifferent. My younger sister, Ivy, was adored, spoiled to the point where she barely lifted a finger. She had my mother wrapped around her little finger, and my father, despite his usual silence, indulged her every whim. And then there was me. I got good grades, participated in sports, and had a knack for painting, but my achievements barely registered in my parents' eyes. My mother, especially, treated my success like an afterthought. If I won an award, she'd hum an acknowledgement before turning to gush over Ivy's latest tantrum-turned-triumph. It was confusing at first. How could a mother not be proud of her child? How could she love one daughter so completely and leave the other to fend for herself? I stopped asking those questions when I realized there were no answers that would satisfy me. It wasn't just about the awards or the lack of attention. It was the little things, the things that built up over time. The empty chair at the dinner table when everyone else got a seat. The forgotten birthday presents, replaced with last-minute excuses. The way my name was always said as an afterthought, if at all. I started noticing things that I shouldn't have, things that made the pit in my stomach grow deeper. My father was strict about monitoring our spending, especially Ivy's. He checked her credit card statements regularly, always making sure she wasn't overspending. But what he didn't realize, what I saw, was that my mother gave Ivy double the allowance behind his back. Cash, shopping sprees, secret gifts that were never accounted for. When I pointed it out once, my mother's face twisted into something ugly. "Don't make things up," she snapped. "You should be happy for your sister." Happy for her? Happy that she got handed everything on a silver platter while I was left behind? I wanted to scream, to ask what I had done wrong to deserve this treatment. Instead, I swallowed my words and nodded. Because that's what I did. I endured. One day, it became painfully clear just how forgotten I was. It was December, just a few weeks before Christmas. Ivy was practically glowing, her arms loaded with shopping bags as she twirled around the house, showing off her latest designer purchases. My father was in the study, going over expenses, and my mother was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared Ivy's favorite meal. No one noticed when I walked in. "Ivy, let me see what you got," my mother cooed, pulling her close. Ivy giggled, pulling out a new perfume set, a necklace, and a pair of boots. "I got these last week, but Dad wasn't looking, so I put them on his card again today," Ivy said with a smirk. My mother chuckled, shaking her head as if she were dealing with a mischievous child instead of a manipulative one. "Just don't let him catch you." I stood there, waiting, wondering if they would notice me, if they would ask me what I wanted for Christmas, if they would remember that I existed. But the moment never came. I cleared my throat. "What about me?" My mother barely glanced at me. "What about you? Did you get me anything?" Silence. A pause too long to be anything but an answer. My mother sighed, as if my question was an inconvenience. "You're old enough to buy your own things." I wasn't surprised. It had happened before. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I turned away, my throat tight, my heart heavy. It was fine. It had to be fine. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could pretend that none of it mattered. My fingers tightened around the blanket. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be their favorite. I would never be their first choice. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be. I would carve my own path. Not for them. Not for their approval. For me. And one day, they would realize what they had lost. But by then, it would be too late. The accident wasn't supposed to change my life. It was just another evening, the sky streaked with fading gold as I walked home. A careless driver, a blur of motion, and then impact. The screech of tires. My body hitting the pavement. The world fading into black. I woke up in a sterile white room, the beeping of machines steady but relentless. My head ached, my limbs felt heavy, but the doctors assured me I was lucky. Just minor bruises, nothing serious, except for the test results that followed. My kidneys were failing. If the treatment didn't work, I'd need a transplant. That was when something strange happened. My father, the man who had always been a shadow in my life, suddenly appeared, hovering by my bedside, his eyes filled with a worry I had never seen before. But my mother, she was different, distant, avoiding my room, whispering into her phone with a tension that made my skin prickle. And then one night I heard her. "I can't let them find out. I'm terrified they'll see she's not his child. She looks nothing like our daughter." The words slid through the crack of my hospital door like a blade, slicing through the fragile hope I had clung to. Not his child. My breath hitched, my fingers trembling against the thin hospital blanket. But my sister was? The sister they cherished? The sister they showered with love, while I was left to scrape together whatever fragments of attention I could get. My heart pounded as I stumbled out of bed, ignoring the ache in my body. I needed answers. My father was sitting outside in the dim hospital hallway, his head in his hands. I repeated my mother's words through choked sobs, watching as his face twisted into something raw, anger, grief, disbelief. He didn't deny it. He just pulled me into his arms, holding me tighter than he ever had before. "Focus on getting better," he murmured. "I'll handle this." The days that followed unraveled my entire world. My father's investigation tore through years of deception, unearthing truth buried beneath a lifetime of lies. My mother had lied to him, to all of us. My sister, the golden child, was not his. I was. And yet, I was the one discarded, the one treated like an afterthought. The betrayal tasted metallic on my tongue, bitter and suffocating. But what cut the deepest was my mother's reaction when confronted with the truth. "You should have never been born." I had spent my entire life wondering why she never loved me. Now I knew. I was never meant to exist in her carefully curated world. My father, disgusted and furious, filed for divorce. But the destruction didn't stop there. My sister, once perched so perfectly on her pedestal, crumbled under the weight of the truth. And instead of facing it, she turned her rage on me. "You ruined everything." Her words were venom, but I was done bleeding for a family that had never truly been mine. Even Daniel, my brother, my last hope, refused to take sides. He stood between us, hands in his pockets, eyes filled with reluctance. "I just don't want to be involved," he muttered. Neutrality was its own betrayal. And then, just when I thought I had reached the bottom, the final blow came. My best friend, the one person who had acknowledged me, who had been my lifeline through years of neglect, had been feeding my secrets to my sister. The things I had whispered in confidence, my fears, my pain, had been twisted into weapons against me. I was alone. But I wasn't done. The glass had shattered, but I would rise from the shards. The silence of my hospital room pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. The truth had been ripped open like an old wound, festering under the weight of betrayal. My mother's words haunted me, a cruel whisper echoing in my head. "You should have never been born." But I was born. I was here. And I refused to let her or anyone else erase me. Days passed in a blur. My father moved through the hospital with a grim determination, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Lawyers were called. My mother was gone, vanishing behind cold legal battles, but her absence left a void that still ached. My sister wouldn't look at me. My brother barely spoke. And my so-called best friend had slithered away, her betrayal leaving a scar I knew would never fully heal. The doctors monitored my condition closely. The medication was working, but it was a slow, agonizing process. The thought of a transplant loomed over me like a storm cloud. My father, once so indifferent, now hovered over me, researching, questioning the doctors with a desperation that should have comforted me, but all it did was remind me of everything I had missed. Where was this concern before? One evening, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, my body aching in ways that had nothing to do with my illness. The weight of everything threatened to crush me. Then a knock at the door. I turned, expecting another nurse, another reminder that I was still stuck in this limbo. But it was my father. He stepped inside, his movements hesitant. He held something in his hands, a small, battered box. "I found this," he said, his voice rough. "Your old drawings. From when you were little." I swallowed hard as he set the box on my lap. I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were faded sketches, rough charcoal smudges, paintings on paper so worn it had nearly disintegrated. Memories poured out with them. I used to leave these on the kitchen counter, hoping, praying someone would notice. They never did. "I should have seen it," my father murmured, his fingers brushing against the edge of the box. "I should have seen you." Something inside me cracked, but I didn't let the tears fall.
Not yet.
Instead, I traced my fingers over an old painting of a sunrise, its colors dulled by time. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father exhaled slowly. "Now we rebuild." Rebuilding wasn't easy. The divorce was messy, my mother's fury seeping through every legal document, every bitter exchange. She fought, not because she wanted me or my father, but because losing meant she had to face what she had done. My sister refused to accept the truth. She clung to the illusion that she was the rightful daughter, the one who mattered. And maybe in my mother's eyes she still was. But my father, he saw me now. And that was enough. The weeks stretched on. My condition stabilized, though the doctors still monitored me closely. My father moved us to a new place, a smaller home that didn't reek of old ghosts and shattered trust. The walls were bare, the furniture unfamiliar, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. One evening, I found my father in the kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. "She called," he said without looking up. I knew who he meant. I waited. "She wants to see you," he continued, his voice carefully neutral. "But it's your choice." For so long, I had wanted her attention. I had begged for it, sacrificed pieces of myself trying to earn a love that was never freely given. And now, after everything, she wanted to see me? I gripped the edge of the counter. Did she say why? His jaw clenched.
No.
I thought about it, about the years of neglect, the cruelty, the way she had discarded me as if I were nothing. And I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who would have run to her without hesitation. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked my father in the eye and said, "I don't need her anymore." The relief on his face was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. He nodded. "All right." Months passed. The world didn't stop for my pain, but I found ways to move with it instead of letting it drag me down. I poured my emotions into my art, each brushstroke a piece of my story. My father, still learning how to be the parent I had always needed, encouraged me in ways he never had before. And then, one day, an opportunity came. A prestigious art competition. A chance to prove, to myself, that I was more than the girl they tried to forget. I submitted my best piece. A portrait of a girl standing in the midst of a storm, her face turned toward the rising sun. A girl who refused to disappear. When I received the letter saying I had won, I didn't run to my mother. I didn't seek validation from my sister. I didn't even tell my former best friend. I went to my father. And for the first time in my life, he looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. "I'm proud of you," he said, and this time I believed him. I had risen from the ashes of my past, and I was just getting started. The first time I stepped into my new school, I felt the weight of a fresh start pressing down on me. The halls smelled of wax floors and teenage sweat, the air buzzing with conversations I wasn't a part of. I had expected a clean slate, but shadows of my past still clung to me, whispering in my mind like ghosts. People stared. Whispers followed me like an unwanted melody. News of my family's implosion had spread far and wide. My mother's desperate attempts to maintain her dignity had failed, and the scandal clung to us like tar. My sister, who once had everything, now bore the brunt of our mother's fall from grace. But I was still standing. I kept my head high, ignoring the murmurs, the pitying glances, the curious stares. I wasn't the girl they thought I was. Not anymore. Art became my refuge. The studio at school smelled of paint and charcoal, and the moment I picked up a brush, the outside world melted away. My instructor, Mr. Reynolds, was one of the few who didn't look at me with pity. He looked at my work with interest, with respect. "You have a way of making people feel things," he said one afternoon, studying my latest piece, a depiction of a girl standing in the rain, her face unreadable, neither joyous nor broken. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The art spoke for itself. Mr. Reynolds leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You ever think about submitting something for a gallery showing?" I glanced at him. "A gallery?" He nodded. "There's an upcoming student exhibition downtown. It's competitive, but I think you have a real shot." Doubt crept in, that old familiar voice whispering, "Are you really good enough?" But another voice, one that had been growing stronger, said yes. At home, my father was still adjusting to his newfound role. He tried, in small ways. He left notes for me in the morning, little reminders like, "Good luck on your test," or dinners in the fridge. They weren't grand gestures, but they meant something. One evening, I found him in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. I hesitated before stepping closer. The pictures were mostly of Daniel and my sister, their smiling faces frozen in time. "I don't have many pictures of you," my father admitted quietly. I swallowed hard, because I was never there. He looked up at me, regret in his eyes. "I see you now." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a perfect fix. But it was a start. The night of the exhibition, nerves tangled in my stomach like barbed wire. The gallery was filled with people, students, parents, art collectors, critics. My painting hung among the others, its colors bold, defiant. I wasn't prepared for the reaction it received. A woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes studied my work. "This is powerful," she murmured. "Who is the artist?" I hesitated before stepping forward. "I am." Her gaze met mine. "You have talent, and talent should never be hidden." By the end of the night, my name was on the lips of people who mattered. My painting was sold to a collector who saw me, the real me. For the first time, I felt something bloom in my chest that wasn't sadness, or regret, or longing. It was pride. But not everyone was happy about my success. The next day, my sister cornered me outside of school, her expression twisted with fury. "You think this changes anything?" she spat. "You think because people like your stupid paintings that it makes you better than me?" I didn't flinch.
No.
"But it makes me me." She laughed, but it was bitter. "You destroyed this family." I stared at her, at the sister, who had once been everything I wanted to be. But now I saw her for what she was, lost, desperate, clinging to something that was already gone. "I didn't destroy it," I said. "It was never whole to begin with." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And then, just like that, she turned and walked away. And I let her. That night, I stood on the balcony of our new home, the city lights stretching before me. I thought about the past, the pain, the betrayals. But I also thought about the future, the possibilities, the hope, the fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The days after the exhibition should have been a victory, but the weight of my past refused to let me enjoy it. I walked through school halls under a microscope. Whispers followed me like a curse. Some people congratulated me on my success, but most saw me as the girl who exposed a family's shame. The pity in their eyes cut deeper than the malice. One afternoon, as I sat sketching in the art room, lost in my thoughts, Mr. Reynolds walked in, his expression tight. He didn't say a word, just placed a newspaper in front of me. My stomach twisted as I unfolded it. "Scandal in the Shadows, A Family's Downfall." A picture of my mother, mid-shout, her face contorted in rage, took up half the page. The article was a detailed massacre of my family's remains, her affair, the deception, the divorce. But what made my hands tremble was my own name, tangled in the narrative. My achievements weren't mine anymore. They were just another chapter in a sordid story. My stomach churned. I didn't ask for this. Mr. Reynolds sat across from me, his gaze steady. The world loves a tragic heroine. I clenched the paper, ball rising in my throat. My art isn't a footnote in their gossip. Then prove them wrong. That night at dinner, my father was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he sighed. I saw the article. I kept my eyes on my plate. Of course you did. They don't define you, he said. I laughed bitterly. But they're the ones telling my story. His fingers tapped against the table. Then take it back. I refused to let them turn me into a tragedy. I contacted the gallery director and arranged an interview, not about my family, but about my art. When it was published, the narrative shifted just a little. People began to see me, not just the scandal. But ghosts don't rest that easily. One evening, walking home from the bus stop, I felt it, eyes on me, a shadow at my back. I turned a corner sharply, pressing against a closed bookstore, my heartbeat a war drum in my chest. Footsteps slowed, then stopped. A voice sliced through the night. You really think you're better than us now? I turned. My sister stood under the dim streetlight, arms crossed, her face gaunt but her eyes burning with familiar hate. What do you want? Asked, my voice flat. Her lips curled. You ruined everything. I scoffed. I existed. Her expression flickered. Hurt, then fury. Mom's falling apart. She lost everything because of you. A bitter laugh escaped me. She lost everything because she lied. Because she spent years pretending I didn't matter. And now that I won't play along anymore, you want to make me the villain? She took a step closer. You're so self-righteous. But tell me, do you really think Dad loves you? Or are you just his last chance at redemption? I froze. She smirked. You were nothing to him for years. And now you're his precious daughter? It's pathetic. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Believe whatever makes you feel better, but I'm done letting you or Mom define my worth. I turned on my heel and walked away, her silence like a dagger between my ribs. When I got home, my father was waiting, his face drawn. She came by earlier, he said quietly. I dropped my bag by the door. Let me guess, more accusations? His hands curled into fists. She said things she shouldn't have. I exhaled shakily. Do you regret it? His eyes widened. What? Choosing me. His face twisted, pained. I didn't choose you over them. I chose to see the truth. I held his gaze, searching for any hesitation. For the first time, I found none. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My art, my future, they were mine. No one, not my mother, not my sister, not the whispers of scandal, would steal that from me. I sat at my easel and painted. A girl stepping out of the shadows, her face bathed in the first light of dawn. The morning after my confrontation with my sister, I felt an eerie sense of peace. It wasn't relief. It was the quiet before a storm, the moment of stillness before everything changed. My past had clawed at my ankles for years, dragging me into darkness, but for the first time, I saw a way forward. A way to free myself. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would magically fall into place, but I knew one thing. I refused to let them break me. The school hallways were suffocating. The whispers had reached a fever pitch, and I could feel their eyes on me, their judgment like knives in my back. But I walked with my head high, my step steady. I would not shrink for them. But just as I reached my locker, a voice cut through the murmurs. You really thought you could run from the truth? I froze. That voice, my former best friend, Emily, stood with her arms crossed, a smirk curling at her lips. Her words dripped with venom, the kind of malice that only comes from betrayal wrapped in a pretty bow. I turned slowly. What are you talking about? She pulled out her phone and shoved the screen toward me. I'm talking about this. My breath caught in my throat. A video. One of me, taken in secret. It was from the night I confronted my sister on the street. The words, "You can hate me all you want, but I won't disappear just to make you feel better," played on repeat, overlaid with captions painting me as the villain. I stared at it in disbelief. You recorded me? Emily tilted her head. Oh, I didn't. But someone did. And guess what? The whole school's eating it up. Rage burned through me like wildfire. Why would you do this? She laughed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Oh, don't act so innocent. Ever since your whole family drama exploded, you've been acting like you're better than us. Like you're some tragic, misunderstood artist rising from the ashes. I clenched my fists. I never asked for this. No. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then why does it seem like you love playing the victim? A slap would have hurt less. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay steady. You don't know anything about what I've been through. She shrugged. Maybe not. But I do know that people love a show. And you? You've given them one hell of a performance. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw my fists against the lockers. But I did none of that. Instead, I stepped back, my voice cold and cutting. I feel sorry for you, Emily. You're so desperate to tear me down because you can't stand to see me standing at all. For a split second, something flickered in her expression. Regret, maybe. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same smug cruelty that had become her armor. I turned and walked away, leaving her behind. Leaving all of it behind. That night, my father found me sitting in front of my easel, staring at a blank canvas. He sat down beside me, silent for a long time. Then finally he spoke. You don't have to fight alone, you know. I exhaled shakily. It feels like I do. He reached out, placing a firm hand on mine. I failed you before. I won't do it again. For the first time, I believed him. The next day, I made a decision. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one on my terms. I returned to the gallery, requesting another exhibition, one that focused on the raw, unfiltered truth of my journey. Every painting I created held a piece of my story, the neglect, the betrayal, the fight to find my own voice. The night of the exhibition, I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my art, my truth laid bare for all to see. The whispers still followed me, but this time, they didn't matter. A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. It's beautiful. I turned. My sister stood at the entrance, hesitation flickering in her eyes. I folded my arms. What are you doing here? She shifted uncomfortably. I saw the interview. I read what you said. She looked at the painting closest to her, one of a girl standing in the rain, alone but unbroken. I didn't know. I scoffed. You knew. You just didn't care. She flinched but didn't argue. I was jealous. I blinked. Of me. She nodded. Dad looks at you like you're his whole world now. And Mom, she's barely a shadow of herself. It's like everything she built is crumbling, and I don't know where I stand in all of it. I studied her, searching for an ulterior motive. But for the first time in years, she looked lost. I don't have all the answers, I admitted. But I do know that what Mom did wasn't my fault. And it wasn't yours either. She swallowed hard. Do you hate me? I thought about it. About all the years of cruelty, the resentment, the pain. Then I sighed. No. But I don't trust you. She nodded, as if she expected that. Fair enough. She turned to leave, but before she stepped through the door, she hesitated. I don't think Mom will ever admit she was wrong. But I hope you find what you're looking for. And then she was gone. As the exhibition came to an end, my father stood beside me, pride in his eyes. You did it. I smiled softly. Yeah, I did. He reached into his pocket and handed me something small and familiar. A photograph. One of the only ones I had from my childhood. It was of me, alone on a swing, staring at the sky. I kept it, he said. Even when I didn't realize how much I was losing you, I kept it. Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I held the picture close, feeling the weight of it, the history in it. I wasn't that forgotten child anymore. I wasn't invisible. I was here. And I was seen. As I packed up my supplies that night, I took one last look at the painting of the girl stepping into the dawn. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't lost. She was becoming.